She was a mother, a soldier, a woman who spent her life serving her country. But in just a few minutes at the park, she became a suspect just for being in the wrong place. This story won't just anger you, it will move you. Press 2 if this touched your heart, and make sure to subscribe now to follow more stories that fight for justice and truth. The spring air in Silveridge was crisp, warm, and filled with the kind of energy that only a beloved tradition could bring. It was the day of the annual summer fair celebration of life, community, and joy. Vendors lined the sun-dappled streets with colorful booths. The scent of grilled corn, sweet pastries, and buttery popcorn hung in the air. Children darted from game stalls to cotton candy stands, their laughter echoing like music through the park. Couples strolled hand in hand, families posed for photos under archways of balloons, and musicians filled the background with acoustic melodies that made the whole city feel like a living postcard. Amid the crowd was a figure that turned heads not because she sought attention, but because dignity often announces itself without a word. General Naomi Bryant, a high-ranking and deeply respected officer in the United States Army, moved with quiet grace in her formal navy blue dress uniform. Medals adorned her chest, not as a boast but as a silent testimony to a life of service. Her hair, braided neatly into a bun beneath her cap, shimmered with silver strands that spoke of decades spent in command and sacrifice and in unshakable duty. But today, she wasn't a general. Not really. Today, she was a mother, a daughter, a friend, just another citizen enjoying a precious day off with her family. She strolled slowly, pausing to admire handmade goods, sampling local treats, and chatting with fellow fairgoers who recognized her not by name, but by presence. At one booth near the corner of the artisan section, she stopped. A modest stand offered handmade leather bracelets, keychains, and pendants. Behind the table stood a woman and her young son, a boy no older than 10, whose fingers nervously held out a simple brown bracelet. "I made this," he said shyly, his voice nearly swallowed by the fair's bustle. Naomi crouched to his level, her uniform creasing softly as she knelt in the grass. She took the bracelet with a reverence that felt sacred. "It's beautiful," she said, slipping it over her wrist. "I think it matches perfectly." The boy's eyes lit up, pride swelling in his chest. His mother, misty-eyed, asked if they could take a picture. Naomi agreed with a smile, kneeling beside the boy as he beamed at the camera. It was a quiet, F-Colting moment of pure humanity. And then the world shifted. A thunderous boom tore through the air like a cannon blast. Screams erupted. Birds scattered. The music halted mid-note. People turned in every direction, trying to make sense of the chaos. Smoke curled upward from the far end of the street, thick, black, and rising from the shattered façade, Finders fine jewelry. Glass littered the pavement. A siren blared in the distance. Inside the broken storefront, a figure was seen moving quickly, dressed in a navy blue military-style uniform eerily similar to Naomi's. A pistol glinted in his hand. His face was obscured by a low-pulled cap. He moved like he knew what he was doing, rifling through display cases, stuffing valuables into a bag. Someone shouted, "Stop him. He's stealing." The thief didn't hesitate. He sprinted from the store, vaulted over a toppled sandwich board, and darted into the panicked crowd. 2 gunshots cracked the air behind him, one ricocheting off a street sign, the other blasting through the front window of a nearby coffee shop. People screamed and ducked. Children cried. Phones were pulled out. Live streams began. Chaos reigned. And somewhere in the smoke and confusion, with civilians scattering in all directions, a dangerous mistake was about to be made. The real criminal disappeared into the mass of bodies, and the wrong woman, standing tall in the uniform she had worn with honor, was about to become a suspect. Detective Derek Madsen had been on the force in Silveridge for over a decade, long enough to trust his instincts, but not long enough to question them when they were wrong. He was leaning against his cruiser, sipping lukewarm coffee, when the alert crackled through his radio: "Armed robbery in progress. Suspect is male wearing a Navy military uniform. Last seen F-Coling toward the fairgrounds." His body tensed. His eyes scanned the crowd of laughing families and vendors. That's when he saw her. Standing near a food stall, casually speaking with a vendor, was a tall, dignified black woman in a Navy dress uniform. Her posture was straight, her presence unmistakable. Madsen's mind raced. Uniform check. Location check. Race and gender? Close enough. Without a second thought, he grabbed his radio. Suspect sighted, requesting backup. Fairgrounds entrance. He moved fast, weaving through the crowd with his hand already hovering near his weapon. The afternoon sun glinted off Naomi's metals. She turned as Madsen approached, the noise of the fair softening around them. "Are you talking to me?" she asked, brows knit in confusion. "Yes, Detective Derek Madsen, Silveridge PD. I need you to answer a few questions." The air changed, the energy shifted, bystanders slowed. Conversations hushed, phones were discreetly raised. Naomi's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it, sharp, measured. "Is there a problem?" "There's been a robbery. Suspect in a military uniform. You match the description." She stared at him, incredulous. "You think I robbed a jewelry store?" Her voice dropped low and steady. "I'm General Naomi Bryant. I'm here with my family." Madsen's hand twitched. His radio buzzed again. K-9 unit inbound. A patrol cruiser screeched to a stop at the curb. From the back leapt a snarling German shepherd, its handler barely holding the leash. "Step back," Madsen ordered the crowd. Naomi's hands raised slightly. "This is a mistake. Call off your dog." But Madsen didn't. The K-9 lunged. Naomi, her training kicking in, sidestepped with fluid precision. The crowd gasped. Someone shouted, "That's a decorated general." "This is excessive." Naomi snapped, her voice finally rising. "You're targeting an innocent woman." People began to shout. Others were already streaming the incident live. But Madsen wasn't listening. He pulled out his cuffs. "You're under arrest," he said. "For what?" Naomi demanded. "Suspicion of armed robbery." She stared at him with cold fury. "You just made a terrible mistake," she said. But she didn't resist. She let the cuffs click closed around her wrists. She stood tall, even as the weight of injustice bore down on her shoulders. Around them, voices rose in protest. "She's a hero. Let her go." But Madsen kept his eyes forward, following his gut, and ignoring the truth that was staring him in the face. The fluorescent lights in the interrogation room buzzed faintly above her, casting a cold white glow over the steel table and cinderblock walls. Naomi Bryant sat with her wrists still cuffed, the sharp metal digging into her skin, but her posture remained straight. She didn't slouch. She didn't waver. A Bryant from her sat Detective Derek Madsen, jaw tight, arms Bryant-ed, eyes darting between her and the doorway. Beside him stood Captain Charles Reddick, a man with a face carved by decades of bureaucracy and blunt force authority. "Let's make this simple," Reddick began, his voice flat, rehearsed. "You were seen near the crime scene. You match the description. Just tell us what happened and we can work with you." Naomi met his gaze, unblinking. "I've already told you. I was at the fair, with my family. There are witnesses, photos. I've done nothing wrong." Madsen said nothing. His earlier certainty had already begun to fray, but Reddick doubled down. "General or not, if you're hiding something, now's the time to come clean." Her jaw clenched. "If you have evidence, present it. If not, I want my lawyer." As if on cue, the door opened and in stepped Tessa Cole, sharp suit, sharper eyes, and a folder clutched tightly in her hand. "That won't be necessary," she said, striding a Bryant the room. "I have the footage." Reddick raised an eyebrow. "Footage?" Tessa slapped the folder down on the table and slid it forward. "Security video from the fairgrounds. Time-stamped. My client was present well before, during, and after the robbery took place. In full view of the public, surrounded by civilians, smiling in photos, signing autographs for children. Meanwhile, your suspect fled the scene in a black SUV 10 minutes before she even arrived." Madsen leaned forward, scanning the still images printed in the file. The timestamps were irrefutable. His stomach twisted. Reddick's voice hardened. "She matches the suspect's uniform." "She matches nothing," Tessa snapped. "Except your department's prejudice. You arrested a decorated officer based on nothing but a uniform and the color of her skin. Now release her." A long silence fell over the room. Reddick's jaw worked as he searched for a response, but the truth was already unraveling around him. Madsen exhaled, his confidence replaced by quiet dread. The case was crumbling, and so was the lie they tried to build around it. Late that night, the interrogation room was empty, but the truth lingered like smoke. Detective Derek Madsen sat alone in the evidence room, eyes locked on the screen in front of him. He replayed the footage over and over, different angles, different timestamps. Each one confirmed what he had already begun to suspect. Naomi Bryant wasn't the suspect. She wasn't even near the jewelry store when the robbery happened. The real perpetrator had fled in a black sub before she arrived at the fairgrounds. The timeline didn't lie, but the system did. Captain Charles Reddick's voice still echoed in Madsen's mind from earlier that evening. We can't let this blow up. We'll make her the face of it. Public needs a name, a story. Closure. Closure. Madsen had followed orders his entire career. He believed in the chain of command and procedure, but now he stared at undeniable evidence and a command to erase it. It was more than a bad arrest, it was a cover-up. He closed the laptop slowly, the weight of silence crushing against his chest. Then, for the first time in years, Madsen reached out beyond the department. He called D.K. Baxter, a former officer turned whistleblower, a man exiled for speaking the truth. Within hours, they met in a dim diner on the edge of Silver Ridge. Madsen brought everything: body cam files, arrest logs, internal memos. Together, they pored over it all. Patterns emerged: misconduct, tampered reports, falsified testimonies, and at the center of it, Captain Reddick. For years, he had protected officers with questionable records, buried complaints, and maintained quiet ties with figures linked to Silver Ridge's criminal underworld. The more Madsen uncovered, the more he realized Naomi Bryant's arrest was not a fluke, it was a symptom. A small crack in a wall of rot. And if he didn't act now, he'd become part of it. For the first time in his life, Madsen chose not to follow orders. He chose the truth. The press conference was held on the courthouse steps beneath a gray sky, but the crowd gathered in silence, waiting. Dozens of reporters stood shoulder to shoulder, cameras pointed forward, lenses trained on the podium where the truth was finally ready to speak. Naomi Bryant stepped up first. Dressed not in uniform, but in a simple black coat, she looked out at the crowd not with rage, but with purpose. Her voice, calm yet unwavering, echoed of Bryant the Plaza. I've served this country for over 2 decades. I've led soldiers in war zones, negotiated in crisis, defended the values we all claim to believe in. And yet, I was treated like a criminal. Because of my uniform. Because of my skin. If this can happen to me, who will it happen to next? Her words landed like thunder. The crowd didn't cheer, they listened. They felt it. Beside her stood Tessa Cole, holding up the folder that had broken the case open: timestamps, footage, eyewitness statements. Proof. Of. And then, unexpectedly, Detective Derek Madsen stepped forward. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. He faced the cameras. I got it wrong, he said plainly. I assumed. I didn't verify. And I followed orders that I now know were meant to protect corruption, not the public. I take full responsibility. And I will testify to everything. The silence broke. Questions flew from reporters, voices rising, phones live streaming every second. Within hours, the story was everywhere. The fallout was swift and seismic. Captain Reddick was arrested that same day, along with 3 other high-ranking officers tied to falsified reports, buried misconduct, and illegal cover-ups. Federal agents launched a full-scale investigation into Silver Ridge's police department. The curtain had been pulled back, and what lay behind it shook the entire city. But more than punishment, what followed was change. Not promises. Not apologies. Reform. Real, tangible, overdue. And it all began with a voice that refused to be silenced. In the months that followed, the storm gave way to something new. Naomi Bryant did not disappear after the cameras left or the headlines faded. Instead, she built something lasting. Drawing on her experience and pain, she founded a national organization dedicated to supporting victims of wrongful arrests and racial profiling. Its mission was clear: to make sure no one else had to stand alone when the system failed them. At Bryant the country, stories began to surface: people who had been silenced, now speaking up, backed by Naomi's foundation. Legal teams were assembled. Investigations reopened. What had once been swept under the rug was being brought into the light. As for Derek Madsen, his badge was gone, but his reckoning had only begun. He didn't run from the consequences, he embraced them. Enrolling in a criminal justice program, he became a police ethics instructor, teaching new recruits not just the law, but the responsibility that came with enforcing it. In every class, he ended the first lesson with the same words: you can choose to be a pawn, or you can choose to stand for justice. Years later, Naomi stood before Congress not as a victim, but as a voice for reform. Her presence commanded the room, not through rank, but through truth. They tried to silence me, she said, her voice calm and resolute, but they only made me louder. Lawmakers listened. New bills were proposed. Oversight was strengthened. Their story no longer belonged to them alone. It had become a symbol of courage, of accountability, of what happens when one woman stands firm and one man chooses to change. It was no longer just a scandal. It was a beginning. And this time the world was watching. 2 months later, the echoes of that fateful day still lingered, but the city had changed. Naomi's face, once plastered at Bryant headlines as a suspect, was now honored on community murals. Her name became synonymous with resilience. Schools invited her to speak. Families approached her in parks just to say thank you. The foundation she started had already taken on multiple new cases, and young organizers looked to her for guidance, not as a symbol, but as a leader forged in fire. Meanwhile, inside a modest lecture hall on the edge of the city, Madsen stood before a room of rookie cadets. No longer wearing a badge, he spoke with more authority than ever. I made the mistake of letting fear and assumption control my actions, he told them. It cost someone their dignity and almost their freedom. Don't be me. Be better. The streets felt different now, not perfect, but different. Because 2 months later, the truth hadn't faded. It had grown louder. And the people who once stayed silent were starting to speak. 6 months later, Silver Ridge was no longer the same. The summer fair had returned, quieter this time, more subdued, but still standing a symbol of what had nearly been lost and what had finally begun to grow. New murals lined the streets, one of them showing a black woman in a navy blue uniform, holding a child's hand. Below it were the words, "They tried to silence me, but they only made me louder." Inside the police department, sweeping changes had taken root. A civilian oversight board now reviewed every major incident. Bias training was no longer a checkbox, it was mandatory, ongoing, and deeply personal. Officers were evaluated not just on performance, but on the community's trust. A new chief had replaced Reddick, one who spoke less in press conferences and more in town halls. And every rookie cop, during their first week, sat through a lecture led by a man who had once worn the same badge and made a devastating mistake. Derek Madsen stood before the cadets, stripped of his authority but not of his voice. He didn't sugarcoat anything. I thought the uniform made me right. I thought instinct justified action. And I was wrong. Dead wrong. Don't make my mistake your legacy. Meanwhile, Naomi Bryant had become a movement. Her organization, the Bryant Initiative, had helped dozens of victims of wrongful arrest, provided legal aid to families silenced by bureaucracy, and lobbied for legislation at the state and federal levels. She traveled to cities where her name carried both weight and warning. She sat at Bryant from lawmakers, activists, even law enforcement leaders, not as an enemy but as a necessary voice of reckoning. She still wore her uniform sometimes, but now it wasn't just a symbol of duty. It was a reminder of how fragile justice could be when assumptions replaced facts, and how powerful one voice could become when backed by truth. 6 months later, the anger had not faded, but it had found direction. The pain had not healed, but it had found purpose. And through it all, Naomi remained steady, not because she hadn't been shaken, but because she had learned how to rise. Not for applause, not for vengeance, but for the people who would come after her, for the ones still unseen, still unheard, still judged at first glance. Silver Ridge had changed. America had listened, if only for a moment. And Naomi Bryant had made sure that moment would echo for years to come. This story leaves us with a haunting question. What does it say about society when a woman in uniform is treated like a criminal simply because of her skin color? We learn that justice isn't about fancy speeches or courtroom promises, it's about action, fairness, and accountability at every level. If laws protect only a few while the rest stay silent, then justice has failed. This isn't just about one person mistreated, it's about a system that's lost its moral compass. What do you think about this story? Do you believe things like this still happen every day? Share your thoughts, and more importantly, ask yourself, when will racism truly end? Maybe in 10 years. Maybe in 100. But one thing is certain, it won't end unless we begin to change it today. Note: this story is entirely fictional and created for the purpose of raising awareness. It highlights issues of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose violence, prejudice, and injustice in all forms. Viewer discretion is advised.